hate about Apple products. All this news, Apple stuff. And I thought we could block that stuff. All right, I have nothing in here. I have nothing for February in here. Oh, I forget that stupid thing. I hate that. Really? No, I always got it in email. I don't even know. Oh, yeah, go like that. That thing.
All right, we'll call this Committee of the Whole meeting to order, and if we can all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Doing roll call, we have everyone present except for Dan Collison, who had to work, and we will not be having a planning meeting at 6 o'clock tonight, so that has been canceled due to a lack of agenda items. So, do we have any public comment at all? I don't think we have any public, no. Oh, you're fine. All right, moving on to our first order of business here, E1, Police Department renovation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we do have the new police facility, needs some remodeling done before the police department is able to move in. And Mike Becker is going to share some information on some possible funding sources that we would have to be able to use that to get them in this year.
Yeah, so when we purchased the building, we understood that there would be some renovations to get PD into the building, and the original goal was get them in as soon as possible and do the minimum renovations to get the facility secure and operable. We had originally budgeted roughly $50,000 in 2022 and $50,000 in 2023, but thus far that doesn't really seem like that's going to be sufficient. So kind of the low-hanging fruit for how do you make up that shortfall would be to pull that additional funds out of Fund 920. The risk there is that we may find ourselves in a position where we're pushing other projects back or committing to a higher levy, or we simply run it negative and then you're running it negative for a longer period of time. At the end of 2022, currently, we had about, I think it was $354,000 in cash there. So it was a little ahead of schedule, if memory serves me correctly, but we still had low point in cash scheduled in 2025, and there was one other year now. And I know, Jimmy, you and I had looked at that, but I don't remember the second year. But otherwise, 2025 was a low point in cash. So if we were otherwise going to be, $100,000 in the hole in that year, adding in additional expenditures would push that down farther. That's acceptable, but we got to make sure we actually have a plan to get back out of the hole.
So what is the usual Fund 920 balance? I think you said 320 is the excess, or what we have in there approximately. What's it usually at?
That is strictly for capital improvements related to the general fund,
Yep.
and that varies greatly.
Okay.
So The idea there is that you simply never want it to go negative, right? The goal is to not be issuing debt, and therefore, the idea is for all the purchases that were housed in Fund 920, we want to have cash. To the extent that we might find ourselves in a situation where we don't have full cash, we can deficit spend, but we should do so carefully and with a plan to get us in short order back into the black. So there's no definitive, right?
Sure.
So 2025 is a good example, right? 2025, we'll levy less than $500,000 for that fund, but expenditures will be probably, at least currently as it stands, expenditures will be well over 2 million, right? So it will vary greatly. You'll see more cash as we approach large expenditures and less cash after those large expenditures.
And I think the reason that we're really kind of talking about this now is because we've had, we really have to get it done before the end of next year, right? I mean, so whether we spend it this year or next year, I mean, it would be nice just to kind of wrap it up and get it done, so. Because you have till the end of next year to be totally out, right? Yeah. So, and I mean, that's assuming that Fund 920, I mean, that's assuming we don't make any other changes that will free up more cash there too, and we've got some ideas for that, or at least I have some ideas on some things that we could do to increase that cash flow in there, in that account too, so. I mean, what are we talking about for total dollars? I know 275, I want to say, was kind of thrown out there, maybe, or something like that.
So last year, I think by December 1st, got quotes in, and we had a few different quotes, and yeah, it was about 275 last December, so we'd have to go revisit them to see how close those are.
And that's including the vault room?
Yeah, that's
the-
including that, so the renovations that are required, I mean, we have to have an evidence room, which is a big expenditure, that piece, for our evidence. The secured lobby, front entrance, and then the interview room, which is kind of all tied in that front lobby place. Those are the pieces of that puzzle.
And you say we've got 100,000 now, basically, that we can work with, is 50,000 last year and this year, as you said, or?
Yeah, so, I mean, technically, if we're gonna move forward, technically, we would amend the budget to pull that 50,000 that was unspent last year into this year.
Right.
But, yeah, if we intend to go forward with the renovations, and we think 275 is the number, we could take action at that and amend the budget after the fact. That would not need to precede any action, so.
Okay. And I mean, that 275, I mean, that's the evidence room, like you said, is a big part of that. I mean, the offices and stuff like that. I mean, is there anything that we can, wait on there? Or it probably makes more sense just to get it up, and you got the guys there doing the work, you might as well get it done, right? So, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's either don't do one project or the other project. You can't really do half of the
Yeah.
project and not,
yeah, I mean, what do you think, Mike? I mean, that other
I-
175, I mean,
I think you kinda gotta go with the front lobby and the evidence room. Without the evidence room, you're now operating out of both buildings, which isn't ideal, especially if you're gonna be transporting evidence around, depending on what kind of evidence that might be. And the other issue is that if you haven't been in that building, when you walk in that front door, it's wide open. It's full access to the whole building. I mean, there's not, and that's not gonna work out real well in the long run. So I think you kinda gotta commit, if we're gonna pull the trigger this year, or in 2024, I think you just gotta knock it out, just get it done. And the evidence room that's expensive. I mean, you gotta have the fire suppression and the separate areas for potentially toxic chemicals and, firearms and on. So it's not cheap, but I think when we go forward, it's gotta be both. Otherwise, I think you end up in a situation where PD's not really operating in a facility that really suits them well and provides the kind of safety I think they need.
So for the evidence room, was there more than one quote given for that, or is that only one company, or?
No, we had three quotes
Three
for
bids?
that,
Okay.
for the actual construction piece, but I mean, we have electrical quote in there, HVAC, the RFID access, the fire suppression piece of the puzzle. We'd get more quotes on the fire suppression, because I think only got one back for that archival dry system or whatever they had for that.
So is the evidence room built by a general contractor then, or is that a specific company?
The evidence room is just built by a general contractor,
Okay.
the actual construction piece of that, because there's nothing, other than putting a wire mesh underneath the sheetrock, there's really nothing fancy about it. It's the HVAC and the suppression piece that's a little more unique.
Okay. I think we should just get it done. I don't think there's any point in waiting.
What do you think, Steve?
It's gotta get done, it's gotta get done. I mean, it's, in anything we discuss here, it's gotta go back to council anyway, so it's not something we're gonna vote on anyway. It's just, this is just general information, this is nothing we can take action on. Anything committee of the whole is, it's no, you can't take action on it. That's, you know, I think we all agree, I think what has to be done has to be done. And Luke, to your point, the cities have, every municipality or government entity, they have to have a minimum of 3 bids no matter what they do. So it's not just grabbing one and we're done. It's, you have to, like when we built the liquor store, we had to get 3 different engineering architect firms to quote out designing the building before we even went to building it. So everything has to be done in 3s. It's not, it's just grabbing one guy and running or taking favoritism. So, as, you know, to that point, it's, you know, we have to have 3 quotes. That's just federal
Yep.
law.
Yep. That's why I asked that.
And on some of these, I only got one quote, it's not on the big stuff, just because we needed a dollar figure to like work with, but we're still gonna have to go back even to the ones that did quote to get an updated quote, plus to get, if we can get quotes from the other people as well.
Most businesses aren't extending estimates out for more than 30 days. Some are even at 15. Material costs are going through the roof.
And
The longer we wait on this, the more it's gonna cost us.
And just to set the expectations correctly, as Travis and I have discussed before, is, you know, this is the, kind of the minimum work to get them in. There will be other additions then to the capital improvement plan further down the road, right? So, and we'll try to queue all those up within the 2024 budget so we can see what other things need to be done in the future and what year those will be and what the costs we expect them to be in those years. But there'll be a slew of additions and, you know, anything from eventually doing a mill and overlay on the parking lot. You know, we're gonna have to have a provision in the future for replacing that the rock ballast roof. You know, HVAC, it's currently geothermal. That's a problem because there's really only 3 or 4 techs in the state that will help you with that. Probably wise to move to a more traditional boiler type system. But so there'll be a number of those things that'll have to get queued up in future years, and we'll talk about, you know, what's the appropriate year for those and when we want to make sure we've got some funds set aside for that. So there will be some additional stuff. I will make sure the council has the right expectation that this is, what we're talking about now is the minimum to get the PD in and be able to operate at least at a minimum level.
How old is that geothermal system?
Went in 2006, and Brad had done had part of it, the purchase, the Brad, or Hobby Farms prior owner, had to do some work on that. We figure as we've talked about it, I think we're safe for 7-8 years, but after that, I'd start getting worried because, like I said, if it goes down, especially in the middle of winter, we might not get anybody out for 2, 3, 4 weeks.
And
That's-
GeoSource, if such, is very, very expensive to work on.
Yep.
And as like you said, there is only very minimal amount of techs that work on it. And if some companies didn't install it, they don't even want to touch it.
Yep.
It's a nightmare.
Yep. So, but the system is working well now, but yeah, we definitely got to make sure we've got a plan for how we're going to address that in the future. And well, it'll be whenever this work gets done. But right now, they've been using the building for, you know, parking vehicles and things like that, you know, forfeiture stuff. But it's whenever the work is done. But we have to be,
Well, it depends on what council approves to get done. You know, if the council doesn't approve anything to get done, then we don't put a date out there. But
There's a drop dead date.
the
I mean,
absolute,
the end date is January 1st, 2025.
no,
We have to be
Tw-
out of the
have to be
current
out of the
building.
12/31 of 2025 is the day that we have to be out. And that's when the fire district would take over full control of the other building. So that's a firm date. We've got to be done by then.
we own the building, we've owned it for, how long have we had it, Mike?
Yeah, a little over a year, about 14 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the
We can move in anytime. We just need to be out of that building by then. Yes, we have to be out, we could, no, we can be in that building anytime.
Yeah, the fire district is currently engaged in a lease to own. They're giving us $120,000 per year for 5 years. At the end of that, at 11/59, 12/31 of '25, the building becomes theirs. And we need to be fully out, all our possessions.
Yeah, so we've got time to get it done, and but there's a hard date there that we have to be moved over, and, you know, the argument is that, well, we either have to spend the money this year or next year, but either way, we're spending it in the next 2 years, we might as well just get it done so they can completely move over to that building.
There's things that he's talking about, don't need what we're discussing right now, that has to be done prior to them moving in.
Yep.
So it's not a matter of just do it this year and this, that year. You're gonna have a guy come in there to do all this work. He isn't gonna wanna piecemeal it, and it's just gonna do this.
Yeah, that is a good point. We will generally get better bids. The more stuff you put together, the bigger package you have, the better bid price you're gonna get, generally. Yeah, we paid cash.
How much do we pay to use the current building the police department's in? Okay, so there's $125,000 there if we wait one more year, just saying. You know, we might be able to incorporate that into
So that,
things for the building itself.
so that $120,000 is already incorporated into the capital improvement plan and is represented as future revenues in Fund 920 already. So those cash values that you see, you know, projected year-end balances already include the 120 coming in each year. Yep.
Well, yeah, so I mean, I think generally consensus is that we want to try to move forward sooner rather than later, and we'll have an opportunity, I mean, once Mike has the direction to go forward with this, I mean, he'll get numbers put together, and we can actually see what it'll do to the budget and that kind of thing before we vote on it, of course, so, I mean. Okay.
Now, I know we had temporarily, or a little bit talked about Public Works sharing that space. Is there anything that, I mean, if we're gonna share that space for 5 years, is there anything that maybe that construction company could do to help with the division? Or is there anything maybe that, Matt, you would like to see if you were to use that as storage, or does it really matter for you?
My 2 cents is I'd rather just not make that PD's building and not utilize it as public works storage. It's Travis's building. It should be Travis's, for Travis to use. That's my 2 cents. Like going in and asking Travis to go in his building to get equipment out of there, and stuff like that, I would rather it went his direction.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we had talked about too, is that if we do need to use that space, that it would be more of a police space, and then Public Works would just have access to it with the police department giving them the access, kind of, so.
Not like they're
Excuse
gonna
me.
have the keys to the building. They
Right.
Right,
can't do
I mean,
that.
could we put up a cheap wall and then a different lock door for Public Works to use a different door?
I don't know that you really
separated,
need
or-
anything like that,
I
because
don't
you're
know.
just parking stuff in the garage, you know, so I don't know that it really matters.
But then he
that
wouldn't
it
have
would
to go
be-
ask for any sort of grant or permission to go in, because he'd have his own door. I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking long-term, you know, if we're gonna be doing all this stuff to this building, I don't think we're gonna be able to give him the new Public Works building that he wants right away. So, I mean, if it's a 3 or 5 year solution for him to use part of that and not have to ask permission, put up a cheap, 2x4 wall and a locked door that he could walk through and have his own key so he doesn't have to ask permission, because there's plenty of garage doors, so even if, Travis said you could have 2 whole stalls, put up a temporary 2x4 wall, some sheetrock, just simple, and then it's a separated space.
It'd have to be more secured than that.
Sure, or
It
whatever.
can't be a 2x4 and sheetrock. It's gotta be secured, because somebody can break into that building at any point at that time. and then just kick through the wall, now they've got free access to stuff that they're not supposed to be access to. I mean, it's a slippery slope. And I agree with you to a certain extent, but it's not the same as if it was something other than PD. I mean, police department is a pretty sensitive matter.
Mayor and council, one other thing right now too is, right now, the illuminated Sandy stuff is over there, and that's taking up 2 stalls right now, and it's not all in there yet, so something else to keep in mind as well.
Did we get that racking and stuff over there yet, or, yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
I haven't been in there yet.
I'd like to take a look at the building, just so when we're talking about it, I have a general idea what you're talking about when you're gonna put up walls and stuff like that.
And Travis, I had a question for you. I don't know if I know Jimmy's done a ride-along. I know I did one with Saba. I think it was last week or the week before. I think it'd be helpful if maybe each of us, or if we could get a ride-along. I don't know if there's a limit. Can you only have one every couple of years? Or because I got some good ideas from Saba, and I think if I could get a ride-along with every officer, you get different officers have different ideas for what we could improve on. So I don't know is there a limit on how many ride-alongs we can have, or if we can get one with each officer when your training's done, or?
In our policy, in Lexipol, our Lexipol policy is once every 6 months for 4 hours. That's kind of the policy.
Okay,
So that's what we've had. I mean, not to say we can't change a policy, but if we changed it, it would have to be across the board. It wouldn't be just for elected officials. You know,
Okay.
we'd have to change it for everybody. So that would that'd be the piece that'd be a little challenging.
okay.
I had thought the same thing, because I had asked to go on another ride-along after I had done that one,
same.
and got told the same thing, so.
Okay.
But yeah, so there's no way to just change that for elected officials. It would have to be across the board, do you think, for?
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could probably benefit just as much by meeting with different people, and we can arrange that. Because I think
Sure.
most of your time was probably spent just discussing, talking with people, and I think you could do the same thing outside of that venue, and that wouldn't be an issue.
Sure.
Yeah, so I had asked Saba before we started things that he would like to see different, and he didn't realize these things and like the things that he mentioned during the ride-along until we were actually doing the ride-along, because it's like kind of out of sight, out of mind. So, I mean, talking to him is good and all, but I think it's just like any job, you remember things as you're doing it that are gonna come out and be like, oh yeah, this could change, like the lighting infill on County Road 5 is something Saba wants to look at, and then housing numbers on some of the newer developments aren't sufficient enough, so fire and PD can't read or don't know where they're going. So, and he didn't think of those until we were actually going through those and he saw them, because it's like out of sight, out of mind. So, I don't know, I think you should definitely do a ride-along. They're helpful.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, do you have a lot of, like, people from the public that are knocking down the doors to do ride-alongs? I mean, would you have an issue with?
No, but that's our way of curtailing that. If
Yeah.
it comes to being a problem, we have the same person that wants to ride along all the time.
Yeah, right.
And how do we say no unless we say with policy that you can't?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much, that's a standard policy that we took, and it works pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see it being a problem if you had somebody that wanted to do it all the time, and it would not help you get your work done.
Correct. And then, the other thing is it's only up to the officers if they, like, some officers don't take ride-alongs.
Sure.
They just, which I can't fault them for that either, because that's a whole nother liability piece that they'd have to willingly take on too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd like to see that new PD building, I guess.
Yeah, just reach out and we can have a
Okay.
day sometime.
Yeah, I'll set up a time in the near future.
Yeah, just reach out to me in the office during the day and we can schedule a time and go up there.
Sounds great.
So do we want to get bids at all for doing anything as far as like a division for public works, or do you want to just, I think it makes more sense to, with the subject matter that you.
Is, we've talked about that a little bit, Matt. It's easier, to put a seasonal piece in there, not something they're gonna use every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And then we don't have to worry about,
easier to clear space out of what you have now than it is to make that a space we go into all the time, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just thinking to address Matt's concern about having to ask permission to
Yeah.
go in. It was just an idea.
Yeah,
That's fine.
okay. All right, good on that. Moving on to E2, accessory structure discussion.
everybody. So this is kind of a recap of what we've gone over a couple times now. First time at the December Planning Commission meeting, when it first got brought up, and then the last COW meeting in January. So a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of just a refresher. So an accessory structure is an attached or detached building. Located on the same lot as the principal building, which the use is incidental and accessory to the use of the principal building. So most of the time, this is a shed, garden shed, or could even be up to a 2-stall garage. So again, the proposed amendments that we're looking at is to change the maximum allowable sizes of these structures. Research was conducted for other cities. We looked at East Bethel and Cambridge. Kind of proposed a chart based on both of those. However, it was kind of suggested that we look into seeing if they could be allowed up to 40% impervious surface per parcel. I believe Jimmy brought up a good point last time that we already do have a 40% impervious maximum for residential districts. So whether that comes from a deck, a pool, a shed, it's all kind of the same. So this would just be kind of making the accessory buildings be able to be larger. And then again, impervious surface is anything where water cannot readily penetrate. So like I said, this would include patios, walkways, driveways, sheds, pools, asphalt pads, and other buildings.
I want to clarify something with impervious surface.
Yep.
Forest Lake, along the lake, they do a lot of paver driveways. Because the paver driveways allow the water to run through and underneath. So when you take a patio, and for example, if it's a paver style patio, that, in my opinion, should not count against the 40%, because it is designed for that water to go through those pavers and into the ground instead of running off. So, I mean, that's just a clarification. When you say patios, if it's a paver patio, that water is designed to go through the pavers and underneath. So, I
I'd
mean,
say a majority of people do like a concrete slab, like.
no, I know
off the
they do,
back.
but like my patio in my back is all pavers.
Okay.
My patio in front is all pavers.
Yep.
You know, even though they're larger ones, they're not sealed in between them. So the water is designed to run through those and still leach into the ground. So, I mean, that only is gonna only benefit anybody that puts in a paver patio. And you're seeing a lot more people doing paver patios versus pouring concrete.
Jason, do you want to weigh in at all?
I have a,
Yeah, I guess technically, there's pervious pavers that are specifically, designed to have the water go through them. There's also a installation process with regular pavers where you leave gaps between and fill that with kind of an open graded rock.
Yep.
Those two systems count as a pervious area, so they wouldn't count against you. If it's the tightly placed, pavers, they still technically do count as impervious.
But you gotta look at it. If grass grows up between them, if the grass is coming up, water's going through it.
Sure, but it's just by the percentage of surface area that can't let water in on a higher rain event, the overall is gonna be able to wash off. And that's the main concern of an impervious area, is how much is gonna wash off that didn't before. And so you're supposed to match what an overall grass surface would do, otherwise you've increased your runoff, is basically the threshold that we're worried about.
I mean, I can understand that if a patio is butted up to the driveway or butted up to the street, because when it runs off of that patio, it's gonna run into the street. I get that, that's containing extra. But in our lovely sand in Isani, it's gonna soak through that grass at any distance. I mean, I get it when you're saying impervious surface, when you put blacktop down on a concrete patio, but 99% of the houses, their patios aren't butting up to the street or their driveways. So that water's gonna run off, hit that grass, and it's gonna soak in. I mean, that, I'm like this on this whole situation. I mean, if we started allowing everybody to build 2,000 square foot structures besides their house, that's all impervious at that point. But there's gotta be a give and take on it. I mean, there's gotta be a realistic look at saying that this water's gonna run up. Take example from my house. Everything from my house, 3/4 of my lot goes this way into the backyard, along with all the other neighbors, and the other quarter goes to the front. So, I mean, that, what comes off the back of my house isn't going out to the street.
Right, and I mean, exactly on your point on how good our sands are at infiltrating water, you know, that exact topic is completely relevant on every single individual given situation, can be analyzed and evaluated for, you know, how much impervious area have you added, how much grass space buffer do you have before you get to the property line, what's your grades doing? And it can be individually evaluated and determined that, yes, this setup will not cause more water to leave this site, but that setup won't. But to do that is to actually have an engineering evaluation done. And so to avoid having to get into that cost on every single one, every time somebody wants to do an impervious surface, we make these percentages as this won't hurt our overall system if it is kind of the worst case scenario or the average scenario of how much grass buffer you end up with. But, you know, any individual situation could be evaluated and found, oh yeah, you have a giant low backyard pocket that's taking all the water and nothing's coming out of here, you know, that would probably be able to be evaluated as, yep, you can have more impervious, and you could go through a whole, you know, process to maybe get approved to do that, but until we have an actual, like, evaluation on each one, we kind of make these blanket.
I get that,
Yeah.
but it's also, I don't need to be an engineer to tell you, that my yard, what runs off my house to the back of my yard, ain't going out this, it ain't going to the storm, and it's gonna soak in my ground. Prime example, this one rain we had this last summer, I had 1.5 feet of water in my backyard. It didn't run away, it soaked down on the ground. It just rained so hard, so quick, it didn't have a chance to soak. And there was no way it was running anywhere else, because that whole, behind my whole area, all those houses butt up and it goes down and like this, and it's like this on the ends. So it ain't, there ain't no storm drains in there. So it's all soaking in the ground. I'm not arguing for myself, I'm just looking at, I think I get what you're saying, because if you said, okay, you can have 1,000 square foot shed, but the neighbor across the street, which everything runs from his out to the street, he can't, he's gonna argue that. I think we need to come into a common ground to make it easier, and I think 40%, it's some of that, some, you know, like you looked at the bigger lots and those other houses, sheds, that's understandable. I mean, it's not gonna run out to that. But I just think we try to make it streamlined so it works best for everybody, instead of having an engineer to come out. Not all time, now, and nothing against you, Jason, not every engineer's got a half a brain in their head, because I've argued with them many times. So, it's a common ground. And sometimes I think that 40% is underlied because of that purpose, because that, like I said, 80% of the water that falls in my yard is going in the backyard. It's not going out the front.
So, I mean, the 40% is what we have now. Really, what we're changing is allowing that 40% to be used for anything, any structure, any impervious surface, and that just gives people more flexibility to use their property how they want. So what you're saying is you'd like something like the patio paver blocks to not count against that 40%.
Yep.
And I get what you're saying too, Jason, but I mean, I would imagine we can draft the ordinance to kind of say these are what count as impervious surface, right? So, I mean, we could say, you know, if we wanted to call it out and say, you know, patio blocks don't count even, we could do that, I'm sure.
You
So-
even look at it, a paver patio costs more than pouring the concrete.
Yeah.
It does. You know, and if you do the pavers right, You're putting down a line base, you're putting down the landscape fabrics, the grass doesn't grow up, which I don't care, it still grows through it anyway. But, like I said, if grass grows up between those seams, water's going through those seams.
It's the same thing with, so I've always wondered this for years, why is a driveway considered, why does water not soak into a driveway considering, or, that's what this says, but, I mean, I have a huge driveway and the water pools in my driveway and it all soaks in. It's just a class 5 driveway. So I mean, if you look at any sort of French drain or anything, they're designed to wick water, right? So why is a driveway on this against you? Because it technically does soak up
Because
water.
Class 5 is clay. Class 5 has clay mixed into it. So with Class 5, with clay mixed into it, clay retains water. It doesn't, you could take a 5-gallon bucket, fill it halfway up with sand, put drill holes in the bottom of it, fill a 5-gallon bucket halfway up with clay, and see how long that water stays in there.
Sure.
The clay will stay there for weeks before it'll finally saturate through it. That's why. There's
Okay.
clay mixed in with Class 5.
I think for the impervious surface requirements, we're really gonna have to look at what the MS4 definitions are for impervious surface, because we are gonna have to make sure that we're in alignment with that and we're still following rules guided by the state.
Absolutely, we have to follow the MS4. I mean, our hands are tied to that, but I still think we can address those other issues of being in those certain forms. Yes, granted, like Jason said, ones with where you put the actual gravel or sand in between the pavers is much better than the 16 by 16 pavers butted together. Still, I'm gonna go on a limb and say 40% of that water that hits that 16 by 16 with the tight joints, 40% of that's, I guarantee, is still going through those cracks. So there's a lot of gamuts into that. I mean, I don't want, I've never disagreed with Mayor Gordon's terms that, you know, some of your property is your property, do what you want with. I understand that. You also gotta go on the other side. You live in the town, you have more regulations you have to follow. You knew that going into it when you moved into town. I don't disagree with that, but I still think we always have a happy medium to work in between. So I think with this subject, as Stephanie brought up, about MS4, I think we need to address that before we can go on any further with this, to see that we can fine tune this and end it in one full swoop instead of meeting on meeting on meeting of it.
Can we hear more of what you have to say, maybe? Get the rest of this in. Good
Yes,
input, Steve.
We can look into that MS4 definition, and this was taken straight from the city's definition, so if you wanted to take out the concrete or asphalt pads somehow or word it different, it's definitely something we can look into. Just a reminder, we do have a existing chart here. It gets incrementally bigger as your parcel size gets bigger, for how large of a shed you can have. The building height and the sidewall height is a little different too on those.
This was a question that I had as far as the height, so.
Yeah.
And Steve, you probably know a lot more than this, than I do for sure. So, I mean, if you're having a huge structure like that, I mean, how high can you go, or how high would you have to go to get the roof where you need it? And, you know, I mean, are we?
That's all gonna depend on what you put in for a roof. But I mean, if you take a 412 pitch means 4 inches every 12. It's 412, so every foot it goes up
4 inches.
4 inches.
Yep.
612 is 6, 8 is, you know, boom, boom, boom. But if you have a 8 by 8, you know, 8 feet, which your roof is gonna be probably around more like 12 feet, because by the time the slope and everything. So, you know, but you spread that out further, that's gonna go up higher. It's going to be higher and higher, the bigger you make it. So, but then you start getting into, you know, way houses are built today, everybody wants that 8-12, 10-12, 12-12 pitch. Well, a 12-12 pitch could be 20 feet up from the top of the rafters. So it all depends on your roof. Personally, I wouldn't have anything over a 612. That's me personally. Because if I gotta go on that roof, I ain't going on anything over a 612 anymore.
So, I mean, if you're building a a shed that's 100 by 100, I mean, 12 feet is
Not even
not even close to being right, so.
One thing we did when we were doing our research, we set the maximum building height on the new chart as 14 feet, because anything over that does require an engineer's,
When you say height, maximum building height, is that sidewall height or is that,
it's
Peak.
sidewall height.
okay, sidewall height is different than,
Yep.
when I look at that, I see it as the whole height of the building. So realistically, an 8-foot wall to get to 12 feet, that ain't much of a roof.
Right.
So that's worded, you want maximum building height.
And that's the previous, that's the current
Yep.
It's worded
one,
bad.
so.
It's worded bad. That's all that is. When I see that, but now when you get to the one parcel size, maximum sidewall height, now that's a different story. But the one on top and the parcel less than 1 acre, maximum building height, I look at that as saying, that's ground to the top.
Yeah. So that's something I guess we'd have to address there to make sure that we're not limiting, yeah, okay.
And then if you remember from the last time, we took a couple different surveys of different size lots in the city and just kind of did some diagrams there. So the yellow box would represent an accessory structure that would be able to be on this particular lot, going up to the 40% impervious calculation, which is roughly 900 square feet. It's already at 30%. This is a typical rectangular lot with, you know, a 12 to 1,400 square foot house, and then the driveway calculations are all shown there in the top right. That red box would represent the current maximum allowable size currently, so that's 580 square feet. And then that green box in the bottom right corner would be what the infrastructure can hold, the engineered infrastructure based on stuff coming up here.
Based on every lot, so if
Yeah.
every lot had a shed, or,
Yeah, and here's just a visual representation of a larger size lot. So yeah, again, that yellow box would represent the 40% impervious. So even though it's roughly the same size house, because the lot's bigger, they'd be able to have a lot more impervious surface, or a bigger shed in this case. That 24 by 24 again is the 580 square feet, or 576, close to it. And then that 40 by 50 is the engineered specifications again. Don't know how much of this you guys want to go over again, but what we determined after looking at this a little bit more is that the majority of the lots in the city will fall into the 1/4 acre to 1/3 acre range, and this just means that 30% to 38% impervious surface is what each lot could take, what it was engineered for in the beginning. So that 40% isn't totally far off from what the infrastructure can hold. And that would be at a worst-case scenario. If everybody did go up to 40% in a neighborhood, then that's what they're calculating for the engineering. And that isn't likely, just for financial reasons for some people. Geographically, you know, every lot can't hold a large shed if it's sloped. So there's other factors that come into play. So here's the new table that we kind of came up with. Basically, it shows that you can go up to that 40% impervious surface area of the site for the maximum square footage. Something that I don't know if we got a whole lot of discussion on last time, was the max number of detached structures. If you wanted to see that stay the same or go up kind of like this, we're showing that you can have more if you have larger acreage in the city. Just wondering if that's something that guys are, all for or
So,
against, so.
I personally, if we have a, say if we have a 40% impervious surface area rule, why should we tell people how many buildings they should or shouldn't have? Like, say if I wanted to have one attached garage, or say if I want to have one detached garage, one shed, and a chicken coop, the chicken coop puts me over. You know, I mean, I know back in 1992 when our house was built, they didn't have these rules, so, or when we moved into our house, I should say. So, yeah, I mean, I'm over it too, so I don't know when these rules came about, but to me, that seems kind of silly. I've always thought that since I saw this, but I don't know, I mean, do we want 20? Probably not, but if we're gonna do a 40% impervious, why should we say what someone can or can't have? I mean,
Yeah, I think that's, the whole goal is to make it completely,
Flexible,
here's the limit, you can be as flexible as you want up to that limit, because this is where our stormwater can handle, you know, I mean, and I think that's, I don't have any problem with not doing any number on it, you know?
yeah, I mean, I don't, 40%, I'm looking at these numbers, maybe 40%'s a little too much, maybe 35 would be better.
It's already 40% right
Okay,
now.
right,
so.
but, I mean,
And we did raise that, 2 years ago or something, I think we did, so, yeah, but like you said, I mean, 38% for, I can't remember exactly what the
That was
size was,
third
I
acre,
guess, but,
yep.
yeah, and then 30% for a quarter acre, right? So we're already doing 40, so I mean, I think 40 is a good number, I mean, that's an awful lot of impervious surface, and, you know, I mean, if you figured, okay, if I wanna just put a cement slab out in my yard, I mean, that your entire backyard probably could be a cement slab at 40%, you know, so, but yeah, I think I agree with you 100% on not having a limit on the amount of structures. I think
yeah.
the 40% limit is enough to do the job.
Yeah, we need to change that.
So,
I would say just
what you're saying is to take out that column altogether?
probably, I mean, Steve,
Yeah.
do you have any input on that? We were talking about the max number of detached structures. If we're gonna do a 40%, why even tell them they can only have 2? Or, because my example was, if you have a detached garage and then say a garden shed, then you can't have a chicken coop or anything else, which, I mean, it would limit some people. I mean, some people have 2 sheds. What if you have, a big garden shed that stores your garden tractor, or even a pool shed that's only, 10 by 4,
Ultimately, it still comes down to the 40%.
That's what I was saying.
But here's the problem. I don't wanna drive into my neighborhood and see 6 sheds in somebody's in their backyard. I don't wanna see that. I don't like seeing people parking their flipping cars in their driveway when they got a 3-star car garage. That's me personally. I just don't wanna see, somebody with 6 different outbuildings in their backyard. You're starting to take away of what the cities, and it's not just this city, it's every city. I worked in multiple cities, and it's the same thing. I argued years ago that I don't know why we can't have chickens in this town. Because Minneapolis and St. Paul allows them. I mean, when you start looking at what regulations are in Minneapolis and St. Paul versus here, my God, that's, there's more houses in 2 blocks than there is in 6 blocks in Isani. I mean, so I just don't wanna see a clutter and a clutter and a clutter. That's all I'm getting at.
I agree, and need to be realistic about it. What Steve's saying, an average city lot, yeah, that'd be like a lot of buildings, over 4 even would be a lot. We're talking larger parcels, more than an acre. I mean,
Then I don't, I think on your,
That's what we're talking about.
on your typical city lot, that's that quarter, on average, you could say it's a quarter acre lot.
Sure.
Quarter or a third of an acre. You're not gonna see too many other, like in my neighborhood, there isn't anything over that. But I don't disagree in the larger acreage. In 5 acres, you could spread 20 sheds out in that whole, that whole area, and you'll never see it. I just think in more of the typical, I think we're on the right page there. You could maybe eliminate it from 1 acre to 2 acres, take it out of there, but I think less than an acre, I think we should just keep it at the 2.
Okay.
Because that's more of the residential area.
Sure.
There is some lots that are bigger than an acre in town, but those, I mean, they didn't allow pole barns in Isani for many years. But I can take you to 20 different places that have pole barns when they were allowed at that time.
what's considered a detached structure? What's a definition? Anything, like a chicken coop, would that be considered one?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, can we make exemptions like for rabbit cages or chicken coops? Because if somebody has one and then they wanted a shed and then to add on maybe a detached garage, which they're allowed to do, they wouldn't be able to do it. That'd be my problem right now if I was following these regulations and I wanted to add a garage, I wouldn't be able to do it, which would be really silly. So maybe define a garden shed under X amount of square feet or a chicken coop, not as a detached structure.
Or do we just do the limits
Is that
for,
possible?
Anything's possible, yeah. I mean, I would just prefer to see us take that entire column out and just trust the individual homeowner that they're not gonna, you know, I mean, I know maybe there'll be some will do 10 buildings maybe, but I mean, I doubt it, you know what I mean? If you've got the money to build those buildings, you're probably not gonna do a lousy job of it. They're probably gonna look nice and, you know, I mean, I trust the homeowners to make their decision based
with
off
you
of that 40% limit, so. I would just like to see us take that out, and I understand what you're saying, Steve, and I get that concern, but I don't think that people are gonna build that many structures and not have them, if you've got the money to do that, you're probably gonna have them looking nice too, so. And I think you're right, Luke, I mean, with a chicken coop, I mean, you start adding different, or a pool house, or maybe you wanna have a hot tub with a hut around, I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could do, you know, that we wouldn't even be able to think of here today, so I think just leaving it as vague as possible gives the most freedom to the residents and to the property owners, so.
I agree.
I guess I kinda do see where Steve's coming from. Maybe on the smaller lots, we could do like 3, and then anything over an acre, there isn't. I mean, just because Steve's point is valid, because there are a lot of lots, and there might be people that start uglying it up with like 4 or 5, or you never know. So I mean, on the smaller lots, I totally get it, but anything over an acre, I don't think we should limit it. But
But even on the smaller lots, you're gonna run out of 40% pretty
True.
quick, because remember, you got your house, and you got, I mean,
true,
you know, you're still limited by the 40%.
that's fair.
Yeah, I say just wipe out that row.
Anything else, Ryan, on this, or?
not on this slide. So we kind of came up with some pros and cons, I guess, you could say, for this rule, just to consider. It is flexible. It's more flexible in that you could possibly have larger accessory structures to the lot. Prefabricated shed sizes might be larger than 580 that you want to have on your lot. And then the big one is really, there's more space for people to keep things inside a building rather than out in their yard, in their driveway, anywhere else you can think of, that it'd all be contained in one space. I'm sure a lot of neighbors would like that, that they don't have to look at a lot of miscellaneous items, let's say. Couple things prohibitive that we came up with. We would like to see surveys for our review, just to see how much people actually have. There's gonna be a lot of people coming in that aren't gonna be very truthful about what they actually have on their lot. And we don't know unless they pull a permit for stuff. So that's one of the things. New owners should also be made aware that these percentages, if they wanted to do a big shed, that they would no longer be able to do anything else in their yard based on this impervious surface requirement.
Or that they're purchasing a house with a large shed, that it should be disclosed to new buyers that they aren't allowed to put anything else on the property, I guess. Because people buy houses with big dreams, obviously, and they're like, oh, now we're gonna put in a pool, we have this nice shed, and then they find out they can't, so.
We're not changing that, so I mean, do we do that now? Because we're already at 40% now, so we're not really changing anything as far as the 40%. Do we give them a warning label now that says, hey, you know, just so you know that we don't do that now, do we?
No, but right now, allowing their sheds that we allow doesn't get them up to 40%, I guess, it could just be a shed, so just something to think about. We will likely have more complaints from buyers that they can't do what they wanted on a house that they bought, on a lot that they bought.
Are you talking an actual land survey?
Yes.
So
I'd say take that out. That doesn't make sense. Everybody knows what their city lot is. I mean,
right.
charge them $4,000 if they wanna add a garage or something, or, I mean, just to add on to
That's
the
what we're saying.
cost.
How do we
Well,
know at the
it's gonna
staff
likely
level?
cost us staff that, a lot of time to figure that out then we're gonna have to calculate the percentage. And so, yes, take measurements and we'll have to let Jason help us make sure that we're correct on our percentages. So it will cost the city money to
Don't
make
we
sure.
have to do that now?
Well, we don't have to calculate percentages. Now we just make sure it's within the square footage amount that is allowed. So
Right,
we
but
can
what if it's,
calculate
what if
that.
it's over what if that puts them over the 40% now? How do we know they don't have a concrete slab out in their backyard where they have a hot tub sitting or something like that, or, you know, I mean,
So every
We're all-
single house that's sold right now, you know the lot size. So I just don't understand if it's a 10,000 square foot lot, that's small, that's less than a quarter acre. 10,000 square foot times 40% is 4,000 square foot. It's really easy. I guess I saw that and I was like, I don't understand why that's in there. I mean, you're gonna always have people that are gonna break the rules if that's what you're worried about. Someone has a structure that didn't have a permit pulled, so you're trying to account for that. I mean, you have, I guess, I don't know, even on Beacon, you can look up, it'll tell you the rough size of a building, won't it? Like if you click on it, it'll tell you the rough size.
We can measure.
Yeah,
It's not entirely accurate, but.
right,
And the pictures aren't updated annually or every
Sure.
day. So
Sure.
we don't know what's happening.
There's a
Here's the
lot-
thing, and here's the thing I'm gonna say about it, and I don't disagree with Councilman Heeman or Mr. Merrill, is people sell their properties or they sold the property and they got a past water bill. And we've been dumping it on to the new people that buy this property. Do you honestly think those people are gonna be honest when they sell a property? If they sold the property, does the city know that that property was sold? Absolutely not. Unless they're coming in here and notifying you that they're selling this property, you would never know the property was sold.
We do know because of our GIS updates when property owners sell and as well as the utility bill.
But you don't know about it until after it's too late.
Right.
It's not coming in and saying, I'm gonna sell my house, put it on the market tomorrow, so I want you aware of it. I'm not gonna say a damn word.
Right.
I'm gonna sell my property and I'm gone. Plain and simple. Until you go to research it and find it, you would never know it. Plain and simple. So I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of things that people are gonna do to get out from doing a lot of things. And I don't know if it's quite $4,000 to do a survey. It depends on if your survey stakes are in place. If they're there, it's a lot cheaper. There's so many variables in it. If they gotta go they have to go 10 miles down the road to find a survey point, and that's out in the middle of a swamp, they're gonna charge you more money. But most city lots, they're all pretty much benchmarked. They already know where they're at. So, but I just don't see in adding that endurance into that problem. I mean, I wanna try to make things as simple as we can for people and as transparent as possible.
So we're discussing this just so because I'm the new guy on the board here. This is all because we have to abide by MS4 regulations, all this drain water.
We do have to abide by MS4 regulations, yes, from the state.
Can I get a link to that? I searched everywhere this week trying to find those regulations, and they're not available to the public to the best of my knowledge.
They are.
I'd
They're on
really
the
like to read through
MPCA.
all of those.
Okay.
Because are they requiring cities then to have 40% or 30% or 20% or?
It depends on the city and the soil. I don't know, Jason, you can,
No, I guess they're primarily concerned with anything leaving the city, going into the public waters. And, I mean, that's literally the primary concern is that anything leaves the city's surface that's contaminated or increased rate to cause downstream problems. And so the primary thing is all of our discharge points have to be monitored and make sure they're not increased and they're not causing any other pollutants from getting out.
Has there been a
So-
problem with them?
Well, they all were, we spent the last 5 years getting everything back up to speed on the discharge points, but the concerns are if internally we increase our runoff because we've added impervious, that's gonna chain reaction to increasing the discharge, and that's one of the things that we are supposed to be keeping track of. So, so internally, one lot versus another lot, how much impervious is on it isn't specifically MS4's concern. It's just the net, what's accumulated, that it's all being treated properly and not getting out improperly.
So is there any fines to the city at all if we just scratch the whole thing, just out of theory? I mean, if we didn't have to worry about how many percent of surface, we just scratched it. I mean, is there fines from the state, or is it just something the city wants to do?
I guess it's the downstream impacts of scratching it, if it all is done and there's more runoff that's flooding out our ponds, that's flooding out, people's homes downstream, there'll be costly impacts. If the discharge ends up going up, then we'll be getting fined. But, that's after, downstream, that's where things are getting tracked. So upstream, it's how do we control not increasing the accumulated problem.
Okay.
So, on an individual basis, one spot could probably pretty much go as big as they want. It's just.
Do we have
max.
any problems right now in any areas?
Yeah, most of the downtown doesn't have storm ponds, or undersized storm systems. We're kind of maxed out. That was part of this last 5 years. We were trying to restore ponds that had filled up with sediment, storm aprons that had clogged, so the storm wasn't working right. So we're trying to get it up and functioning, but we can't really add ponds to fully developed downtown tight gridded lots. And so that's all pretty tight, where we're having some runoff problems. It's kind of the reverse situation of what you guys are talking about, in that the smaller lots that can't really add much, we're already kind of having our problems, and the bigger lots, we don't really have as many problems because of how good our sand and grasses are out there. So it's, the areas that are problems are probably gonna be the least impacted by, these things that we're doing here. But, the two things that I just, in general, would want to bring up is the 40% topic is after, total for the lot. So like you're saying, you can do the math on how big a lot is, but somebody's got to figure out how much impervious they already had, which is their house and what other outbuildings they already have. That was that original topic of somebody surveys what physical boundary of impervious exists. That would get subtracted out of how much more they can have. And so if they show up and they're like, yeah, I want a 100 by 100 building, yeah, we can do the math to know what the total can be, but we'd have to subtract off what they already have. And so somebody would have to do that. And right now, all they're doing is going, oh, your building you can add is 2,000 square feet. Oh, that by that's 2,000 square feet. You haven't done any other permits for an outbuilding, you're good to go. Less staff time evaluating if what they're doing works. The other thing I just want to bring up is that impervious percentage from models and things, the bigger the lot gets, the lower the percentage. I just recommend, if you went forward with just 40% everywhere, that you would write in that if one of those bigger lots exceeds, either if we had those percentages, in your new ordinance or whatever, that they would just have to deal with their runoff, in a way that either determine that there's enough grass to have that get addressed before it's leaving their property, or they just dig their own little depression next to their big building, and then they now have not increased runoff from their site, and then, and then it's balanced itself out, on the system citywide.
So
George, that 40% number, that, I think it was 30%, 20, it was 25, and so a couple years ago, I said, why can't we just do 40, you know? It's a number we pulled out of a hat, just because I wanted it to be more than what it was, you know what I mean? And we were able to move forward with that, with the rest of everybody else going along with it. So the 40% is just, basically just because it was more than 25, you know? So there was no, so if you want to go 100%, we could do that too.
Well, the goal is not to overstrain the stormwater system, and the other goal is to make sure what we're putting in it comes out clean on the other end. That's the basic goal. And right now, there's really not a problem other than downtown with that particular two things. Is there anything on the books to fix that problem in the future? If he's really having, I don't know how
I
big
don't
the
know if
problem
it,
is.
I mean, I don't know that it's a huge problem,
And Councilmember Heeman, you had asked about fines from the MPCA. I was on the receiving end of those in Granite Falls, or at least I was noticed. And there, in Granite Falls, the fine started at $1,000 a day. And they would, for stormwater, there was point source contamination. We had illicit discharge into the river, we'll say. And so long as that is not remedied, fines go on $1,000 a day indefinitely. So $365,000 a year gets very expensive very quick and allows for quite a bit of remediation.
we're not getting any fines now from.
No, but
what
that should
is
be-
Sort of an issue with water pooling up is not causing us to.
No, and I'm not saying we're near that point, but that is that's the stick. How about that? So,
And we are required to report on MS4 annually, so there is a large report that takes a lot of staff time to complete, where we report any changes or any illicit discharges or anything relating to the MS4.
Say, George, do you ever deliver to job sites where they're building new homes?
Oh, yeah.
You've seen those silt socks around those properties?
The what?
Silt
Oh, yeah,
socks?
right.
You know, a couple years ago, I got denied an inspection, which I had nothing to do with those, because the builder was numerously warned by the city that if they did not have those in place, that they weren't going to inspect anymore. And I thought that was the dumbest thing in the world, and I sat down and we had a conversation with Stephanie about this. The city does get fined by the MSP, the Minnesota Pollution Control, MPS, however you wanna say it. They do get fined if they do not follow that in accordance. That's just being one little factor, you know, so now this compound, somebody dumping drain oil down the storm drain. Now all of a sudden, we're not aware of it, because we don't see it, but we indirectly get fined for that. So it's not a matter of, we lose funding and we get fined.
I was just wondering how this is going to affect the difference of our stormwater system or pollution on the end.
Yeah.
I don't see it really affecting it much, but I'd have to look.
And it's not just that, it's people fertilizing their yards, all that runoff, all that fertilizer, where does it go? Ends up in the river.
Well, and see, that wouldn't make any difference whether that was 25% or 100%.
It does, because the more that you have running off of that and not soaking into the ground, the more goes to the river.
Oh, yeah, in that scenario, yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So if you-
basically fertilizing their driveway, right.
Yeah, so more and more, the more and more you do that, go up to Pine City and look at the Snake River. Look how green that is. You know why? Because all those cattle farmers along the river, and all their runoff, and all that does, it makes all that algae just bloom in the river. And I could never figure it out for a long time until I talked to somebody up there, and that's what it's from. All that fertilizer and all that runoff's gotta go someplace, and where's it go? That's why they also say not to flush your drugs down your toilet. I mean, your prescription meds or outdated ones. Because what that does is it essentially hits the groundwater source, and it does adversely affect drinking water, and it affects, somebody can be drinking out of it and all of a sudden they're getting an overdose of something because it's not something they can have. So that's why they strongly urge you not to flush your unused medication down the toilet.
I think I read a story one time that they had tested fish for, and they, yeah, so.
Yep.
But yeah, so I mean, it's obviously, it's important, we want to be careful with those things, I'm not saying that that's not important, but you're asking good questions, yeah, I mean, it's really not the end of the world if we go to 40% and just give people and just trust the residents that they're gonna be responsible with their property, you know, I mean, I think.
So I think Jason had a good point with he's not, I can't really word it exactly the way he did, but with us looking at, say, if somebody builds this huge structure, if they have to put their own pond in their own yard to account for that. Like, say, I think if you go with the 1 acre lot, you can have, with the 40%, you can have up to a 100 by 100 garage with the average house and driveway. So if you were gonna build something that big, I think it'd be kinda interesting if they maybe had to take care of their water some way.
Storm pond.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what we're looking at, though, too, is does that add a cost? I mean, do they have to engineer that? Do they have, I mean, what all goes into that? Is it just, they just dig a hole and they're good, or they have to actually put some money into that, something like that?
Right, I guess, you know, and that's where it could come down to just however you want to phrase this, you know. Yeah, to get an actual model to know for sure it worked would need to get designed. But, you know, to have them just show us that their yard is actually a low point, it's not
Sure.
gonna leave, you know, that's easy, you know.
So
and it
just
doesn't have to
something,
be a wet
that would give
pond.
us the ability to come back and say, hey, you're not
You're
handling
running off
this, you
more
need
than
to
you're
take care of
supposed
it."
to,
Right.
you
If
know,
it was
you're
an
gonna have to
issue.
fix something.
Like
Yeah.
a disclaimer almost.
Sure.
Because I mean, I personally, I like the 40%, but then again, I don't, because I don't want to overwhelm our infrastructure. But I also think it's nice for people to be able to do what they want, but at the end of the day, if our infrastructure is overwhelmed, that's going to get really expensive. So I mean, if we could do something like that, that would be great. I mean, say if we do a 40% rule and say we have one suspected property that's high, and we suspect that they're having a huge drain off issue, that we would have the ability to go and have them potentially do something about it. You know, I don't know if that makes sense at all, or if that, I mean, that gets complicated,
Well,
but,
I mean, I think if you put language in like that,
Yeah.
that if they had a large property, I mean, that if there was an issue, that they.
or
they
for
would
any,
have
for
to-
any property.
Yeah, right, if there is an issue, they'd have to address it, yeah.
I think that's fair, because, I mean, you get your building, and then say, if you have to dig a pond or do some sort of, I don't know, you know,
There has to be a way to make those surveys. I mean, a building inspector is most likely gonna be going on the property if they wanna add a garage or another building. Well, if they have 3 acres, and it's obvious they're not even close to 40%, a survey should be required.
Yeah,
There
I mean,
has to be
Steve
some
was
language
saying
in
that
there.
too,
Yeah.
so I mean, I think we could just X that off for now, the new owners, I mean, giving them a warning, right now, we're already at 40%, we're not really changing anything, I think we could X that off. Potential for stormwater capacity to exceed, so I mean, that's just kind of a general note there, but like I said, we're already at 40%, so you can kinda X that off.
yeah.
Potential for dwarfing primary structures is increased, which will obstruct the sight lines for neighboring properties and diminish the appeal of a small-town living. I mean, not everybody's gonna build a shed, you know, I mean, that's the thing, is you're making rules for the few people that are gonna actually want something, and then also have to be able to afford to build it, and, so I mean, it's not like you're gonna have a whole bunch of these huge structures everywhere, so I mean, and like Steve said, you've got 20 places right now that you can think of that you've got big sheds and pole barns in, so I don't think that's a big deal, and then enlarge stormwater infrastructure for future developments,
That's something we can work on.
yeah, yep.
And I think like Jason says, I think if somebody, if they're gonna have a potential going over that, on those larger, they can put in a holding pond. But you're gonna probably find majority of the properties are going to be in a position like mine. There's gonna be a few that have a storm drain in their backyard. I mean, you go over on South Brookview over here, wherever the hell it's called, and they got that creek running through there. A lot of that water's running down in that creek, and where's that creek go? It goes out to the Rum River. Those are special circumstances, so.
Yep.
I think, you know, that's that, and I think we need to, you know, get some more, the MCC4 regulations before we can really nail things down. 40% is only a few percent off of what, above that, I wouldn't suggest going over the 40%.
I agree.
And I think that second modification that he brought up, what we discussed, I think that's fine with me.
I think it's a good idea, just a in-case type situation.
Yep.
Thanks for the input on that.
So we're gonna say 40%, we're gonna get rid of the height requirement, or we're gonna use that new table that you have for the 14-foot sidewalls. And then basically the only thing that we really need to dig into is the pavers and whether that's.
And that's something that that
You already
can
know
be
the-
fine tuned.
You already know the answer to that, Jason? I mean,
Well, I mean, by the definition of impervious that MPCA uses and things, it does differentiate the type of paver with the
Okay.
impervious pavers or the specific kind. I mean, it still kind of comes down to what you guys want to do, but by definition, that's the case. Same with the gravel driveways. Technically, a loose gravel, technically isn't impervious, but once it's all driven on and compacted, pretty much if water can't soak in within like 48 hours it's too tight to
Becomes impervious.
causes a runoff that, on those rain events that, act like it's impervious. So,
I mean, even if we don't follow the MS4 stuff, I mean, there's no fines if we decide that we're not gonna count pavers as impervious surface, or we don't count gravel driveways as impervious surface. It's just, we would have a problem if we had an issue with contaminated stormwater. That's really the only point where they enforce things, or?
well, it's just the continuous chain reaction of, the higher you go, the more water's gonna run off, and you're gonna have more going, just the higher risk of more problems, but.
But I mean,
In
if
the
we put
end-
in our ordinance that we're not gonna count pavers and we're not gonna count gravel driveways, which, I mean, there's very few gravel driveways, I think, anyway, but let's say if we don't wanna count those, I mean, MS4 is not, the state doesn't have the ability to come in and say, oh, well, you can't have that in there.
Yeah, I guess I don't even know what your guys' policy is on gravel driveways, just in general, can people put in gravel driveways?
Not anymore, no, I
Yeah.
don't think so.
So, my only other thought is if you're not counting those things, how is it regulated that somebody wouldn't be able to put a whole lot of that in then, and it really is
Yeah, I
increasing
see
the
what you're saying,
runoff,
yeah, that's a good point.
I'd rather stick to the 40 and, 40% of your property, even on a smaller property, that's still quite a bit of room. I mean, even if you count a patio, even if it's pavers, I think the 40% kind of is overarching on everything. Even with, I don't think a gravel driveway should be considered, because water still goes through it, but, you have 40% is still quite a bit. So I don't know.
Do you wanna just say 40% with the MS4 language? on
Recommendations, because,
What is impervious surface?
yeah, because Jason said there is still the permeable pavers, which you can, so, yeah,
And
Settled?
we have impervious surface defined in our zoning ordinance, so we could, it does state what is allowed, I believe. Do you have? And we can include those things that are allowed by the MS4 into our, we could actually use the exact same definition if it already isn't, as they use in the MS4.
Any other questions for us at all? I mean, I think that we kinda,
I actually do have two more topics that we need to discuss that are related to this. And they are the implications of larger accessory structures and the perception of permitted home occupations, because currently the zoning ordinance restricts what kind of businesses can be operated from a residential parcel within the city to limit noise, traffic, and other nuisance issues upon neighboring properties, and home occupations are required to be registered with the city through an application process that's approved or denied by the Community Development Department based upon our zoning code. So I put that within this, and that is something that we really need to consider. If we're gonna start allowing 10,000 square foot sheds, are we gonna start having auto body shops show up in neighborhoods? And so that's something we don't currently allow. What is the traffic implication of that? Well, we have cars parked everywhere. Like, all of those things need to be considered when we're talking about this.
yeah, I had a question on that. I know that mechanic facilities aren't technically allowed. Why is that? That's just for cars? Because there's a lot of people that work for themselves or don't want to work for somebody else that have space. It's your property. I don't understand why that's an ordinance now.
I think because we can't regulate the waste, especially for runoff related to MS4 because of stormwater. So if we do have an illicit discharge of somebody draining oil onto their parcel, and obviously some people do their own stuff at home, but to have it continuously on a site, it really becomes a brownfield site then. We had an issue with that in Princeton, actually, where I previously was, and the MPCA would come out regularly, and that site was mitigated years prior, and they would still check on it, the soil for it. So it is harmful to the city, and we need to manage and know where they are, so they need to be regulated.
Just to clarify something for you on that. Minnesota Department of Health. If you have a 4-car garage at your home, you can put a trench drain in it, you can daylight it, or you can, depending on the city, you can put it in the sanitary sewer. Or one or the other, or both, whatever. But if you have a mechanic shop, you have to have a flammable grease trap in there.
Sure.
Car wash, over here, have to have a flammable grease trap. There's reasons for that. So if you all of a sudden put in a 10,000 square foot surface building, you're gonna start doing mechanic work out of there as a home operated business, but you didn't plan for all these things. Now you're not just issuing into the city, now you're messing with the state of Minnesota, Department of Health, all the way down the line. There's a whole line gamut of that. And not everybody wants to have a home operated business next to them.
Right. So, I mean, that is a valid concern. I mean, if you have a big space, you're likely to be using it for something like that. But I guess, yeah.
I don't know if are we ready to have that kind of discussion right now? I mean, or do you wanna try to do these things together, you're saying? Or?
That one's, I just want you to be aware of
Yeah.
it and to think about it. That one isn't in the same ordinance section, but the second one is, and that is for accessory dwelling units. So if we are gonna make changes to this part of the ordinance, I think it'd be nice to do it all at one time.
So if you wanna have a mother-in-law apartment or
Yes.
something like that, yeah, when
That's
right now
gonna
they
be
can't
allowed.
do that.
Right now, we do not allow it in the city, but Isani County does now allow it within the county in their ordinance. They passed it last year. And it is something that's becoming increasingly more common. And if that's something you guys would like to discuss on this, we'll bring it back with that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I mean, just to have your family close by that helps build strong families too. So, yeah, I don't have any problem.
I have any problem with that mother-in-law apartment.
yeah.
The only thing I think that we just all keep in mind, and I wanna kinda move this, otherwise we're not gonna get through this by
Yeah.
7,
Yep.
is I think if you're gonna have that larger structure, I actually have no problem with somebody having an at-home business. There's a lot of at-home businesses that doesn't affect anybody. But I think if you're gonna have that big a structure, we need to get an idea what you're doing with it.
Sure.
And I think any at-home business, I don't care if you think it's an inconvenience, for them to walk in here and say what they wanna do, we can say yay or nay just as easy as we can turn a blind eye to it. And I have no problem, I have strongly suggested if we can bend some of our regulations for people, all they need to do is come through that door, come up here, ask for permission, and I wouldn't have any problems bending it as much as we possibly can.
So
I have no problem with that.
would you like to see some of these home occupations listed as conditional uses within this
Yes.
district?
Absolutely.
Because that would allow, because we, for instance, just had someone who is a masseuse out of their home. And so they apply for home occupations, they're not licensed anywhere, but, so Ryan or I can just approve them based on what they say their traffic is, and as long as we know that it meets all of our requirements and it's not gonna be 50 cars at a time, we'll approve it ourselves.
I have no problem with them coming in here and
Yes,
asking for it.
but
I think it
then-
should be a conditional use permit.
So if we do a conditional use permit, for all home occupations or just specific ones?
I think it should be all of them.
Okay,
Because it isn't no skin off their nose for them to come in and ask
Okay.
for it. It's not costing them $1,000. It ain't breaking the bank for
yeah,
them.
usually we don't have a fee for home occupations,
No.
so,
And I don't,
yeah.
so I just jokingly saying it being, whatever did you say it was? The people have asked
Oh,
about
a masseuse, yeah.
A masseuse,
Like
as long as it
that's
isn't a brothel kind, we're fine with that.
We
So-
don't allow adult businesses within most of our zoning districts, just one.
That was all I had. I
As
just had to
required.
chuckle about that, so. But I don't see I don't think
I
any
think
of you would
that's a
disagree with
good
it.
point, yeah. I mean, if you left everything the same, but just said, hey, we're gonna allow for more.
Conditional
People
use
come in
permit.
for
If they come in
conditional
and
use
say, I'm
permits.
gonna start doing, building, whatever. They're gonna start changing motors and cars and stuff. We need to get neighbors involved in that because they're the ones that are gonna be impacted by
Yeah.
it. Not you or I if they're not next to us.
I think that's.
So are we gonna define a home business? Is that a business where people actually come to your home and you perform business, interact with another person? Or could it be defined as one guy in his garage building American flags out of wood and has 4 or 5 saws but nobody comes there because he does everything over the internet and, mean,
Like I
that
said,
guy
they could
shouldn't
come in
be-
and ask and.
That guy shouldn't be, having to come in.
So if you're listening to a saw scream all day long and you work nights and you try to sleep during the day and the saw is screaming all day long and you can hear you and it affects you, how would you feel about that?
I would walk over to my neighbor and say, hey, you know,
You would walk over to your neighbor and he'd say, tough shit, I can do this.
We
And
say
You
that,
understand?
can we say that kind of stuff on
hours,
Facebook?
And, you know, everybody can. You
But
can
I'm
do
just
your
saying,
job.
I'm just saying that as in the simple fact is,
How would how would that situation be handled now if you had somebody that was wanting to
Do something that
do
we,
something like what George just used as an example?
that we didn't allow, we would tell them to come to the council then.
Well, right, but I mean, like, let's say George's example there where somebody's making, what'd you say, wooden American flags in their garage right now and
Or
they're selling it
something that
online.
A
is
lot of
noisy,
people with
whatever.
smaller businesses don't even notify us like
Right.
that. A lot of them are service-based, so we will have some that even the same thing with accessory dwelling units. We likely already have some within our city limits that we're not gonna get permitted.
That was a question I had too. Say if you build a 10,000 square foot building, what's making you come into the city to tell them what you're doing in there? I mean, is there anything? I guess I've never heard of anything.
Well,
You just supposed-
complaints
Okay.
eventually,
And
we're
if you wanted to,
complaint-based.
if you wanted to advertise it, obviously,
Yeah,
you know,
if you want a
somebody's gonna
sign,
know about it, so.
Well, you have to have a permit for a sign, so.
Okay.
We would notice if there was a sign out there without one.
So, yeah, so basically I mean, I don't know if that's really even a change of anything, that's, because anybody could come in now and ask for that conditional use permit too, right? So,
Well, it's not a conditional use permit, and we have really limited things that are allowed in a home occupation.
gotcha, okay.
So we wouldn't allow anything that, like, would likely be done in a 10,000 square foot shed. I mean, that's the size of the buildings that we have
That's
in
large, yeah.
the industrial park. To be honest, that's $1 million from what I know from talking with all these new buildings, so. If somebody does it, I don't think Mike will say no to a 10,000 square foot building within the city limits, but we will likely have an idea that something's going on there.
So we would need to make a change to allow for people to ask for conditional use
Yes.
permits, okay.
For different things, so
But I
we'll wanna
think
take
that-
a look
I would
at
like
that.
to see that.
Yeah, I think that one change alone, though, would be enough. And then, I like your idea too, Steve, because then you can kind of get the neighbors involved, and you can, yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the neighborhood and what the business is, and, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we'll bring this back again with accessory dwelling unit information.
Okay.
Which I have put some already, the Isani County stuff's in there, so if you look at that and might give you some ideas, and then.
I do have another question. So in the city limits, you're not allowed to build a shouse, if you know that it's a shop house?
Nope.
So why, is that, this would be that the same kind of conversation, correct? Or would that be different? I mean, why is that not
It's an
allowed?
It's an accessory dwelling unit, so the primary dwelling unit wouldn't be allowed.
Okay, so I guess I don't understand why is that not allowed in the city? Because the garage is built bigger than the livable space, or?
Because of the aesthetics of what is required within the city. So we require certain kinds of materials to be on the outside of buildings, and
Okay.
that's not one of the permitted types of buildings also for housing within the city. So a lot of the time, ag buildings are held to a different standard. So in the township, it's much different than within city limits, like we have to follow building code, so it's
Okay.
hard to permit that for us to allow it within the city.
But I mean, the changes we're making now would make the secondary structure where you can have that pole building now, so I think that would kind of
But what if you didn't have a
far as-
house? What if you
Yeah,
just
you're
wanted
saying
to?
you want your primary structure to be that.
Yeah, it couldn't be the primary
I
structure.
mean, I don't see why, I mean, if you're gonna allow it as
And-
a secondary structure, why not a primary structure?
So I mean, some people will build, the whole base layer will be a garage, and then the whole upstairs will be livable. I mean, so technically, according to building code now, that's not allowed, because your garage, your attached garage cannot be over 1,000 square foot. Well, that means you only have 1,000 square foot footprint that you can work with, and that's not enough, but so I would have, say if I wanted to have a house and I had an empty lot right now, if we pass what we're talking about now, this person would have to build a house and then in addition to the house, which is it's kind of silly.
Well, it's also a tax value thing. I mean, if we want to keep our tax values higher.
A house is worth way more than a normal house for many, a lot more. Because people want that garage space. You know, if you have the ability to, I mean, you look at some of these houses, they're, out in the country and they're $5 million.
Right, but you can't build that big of one on a city lot, so it's a different.
Yeah, but you can though, if we do the 40% impervious, if you have a 3-acre lot, you could build, a 10,000 square foot shop house. I don't,
As an accessory.
yeah, that's how it is now, but I'm saying, why couldn't that be the primary?
Oh, that's probably a
That's-
different ordinance than what we're looking at right now.
Okay.
But I think
It's-
maybe that's something that we should add to maybe the next committee of the whole meeting. So, do you wanna
Mayor,
maybe?
Council, I think we would need to look into that because
Yeah.
we just allowed pole barns as of like a couple months ago.
Right.
It's a fairly new thing.
Sure.
Excuse me, I'm not even sure if it would be allowed as an accessory dwelling we'd have to look into that more.
I believe accessory dwelling units actually have to be a standalone structure, not attached to in a garage because of fire wall safeties. So I know, the building official did mention something like that to me, but I know there's
Also,
different.
however square feet of building you have,
Yeah,
it may have to be fire sprinkled.
Sure,
yeah.
So all of a sudden, he just threw another $20,000 at this thing that you don't really want to spend.
sure, yep. I was just curious because I know
And
it's,
second of all, there's a structure like you're referring is a different building code than a home code building. That's why there's not a lot of people that build a pole barn for their home structure, which I think is a great idea. It's a very smart way of doing it, but it doesn't meet the actual building for a home code.
in Isani County it does, because there's,
Certain,
Yeah.
certain portions of it, and then they have to have an engineered signing of it, and it's not just like,
Joe
Steve
Schmo,
Foley
right,
building you a
yep.
pole barn. There's more steps
Sure.
that you're not seeing that has to be done.
Sure.
That I know of. So there's a lot more to it involved in that. So by the time you're all said and done, you could have just stick framed your house and been a lot cheaper.
sure.
But we'll bring back more information on accessory dwelling units to the next.
Yeah.
cow.
Okay. So we got everything answered that needs to be answered for now. Okay. So moving on to E3, the archery range updates.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So I just want to bring an update on the archery range. After the last council meeting, we had brought forward an ordinance change, and you guys wanted to go a different direction. And that was originally stemmed from a prior committee of the whole meeting where we had talked about not doing crossbows and not doing broadheads. So we're just, or allowing broadheads, but not crossbows. So we're recircling back and from the last council meeting where the ordinance was read to just recap everything and make sure we got what we want in the ordinance going forward. So there's two ordinances that would need to be changed to allow the crossbows. The first one is chapter 188. In there right now, it says that no person shall shoot, discharge, or explode any type of firearm, weapon, crossbow, slingshot, or boomerang, or any other type of propelled weapon or device within the corporate limits of the city of Isani without first obtaining the proper license or whatever. So we'd have to strike out the crossbow in that one. And then in section C of that same ordinance, just saying persons using a crossbow or bow and arrows permitted at the designated outdoor archery range within the designated shooting area. So that's just adding in the crossbow to that section. Right now, it just stated the bow and arrows. And then section 230, Parks and Recreation areas where we have all the archery range rules listed. Basically just adding in the crossbows to that section, and then also in the rules, adding the language for the first one designated only for recreational archery, so before it said no crossbows or guns, and just removing the crossbows or, so it just says no guns. And then just adding in language referring to bolts, retrieving arrows and bolts or bolts. So just adding that extra language in there. So I just want to make sure there wasn't anything else you guys wanted to see in the ordinances, so when we bring it back, we kind of got everything that we were looking for there.
So I do have a question on this one. So if we were to change these ordinances, that would mean that anybody could go out and shoot a crossbow in their backyard?
No, it's stated so that in the top section of 188, it spells out, we take out the crossbow, and then section C under that paragraph is the exception is persons using a crossbow or bow and arrows as permitted at the designated outdoor archery range. So it's only allowed at that archery range, not in just anybody's backyard.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're allowing the crossbows and we're allowing the broadheads if they bring their own target and.
Yep.
And that'll be, that designated lane will have a sign for it or something like that,
Correct.
I suppose. And-
Yeah, so that was the other thing, after doing a little more research. Currently, the targets we have, they are rated for crossbows, as well as compound bows up to 380 feet per second on the velocity there for the arrow or the bolt. So technically, we could do it on any of the lanes, but if we want to just still designate one as ADA accessible, or how you want to do that.
Well, I was talking more on the broadheads. but
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we'd have the designated area more on the south end by the creek, where it's just kind of an open field. And our plan was to have just like posts in the ground at 10, 15, 20, so people could just set their target out at whatever distance they want, to have some sort of designation of how far it is.
Great idea.
And then we're just mostly concerned about the maintenance, if we're gonna be open year-round for plowing and taking care of the sidewalks, what level of maintenance we're expecting Matt's staff to plow, if we're gonna have one lane designated as ADA accessible, you know, like right now in the summer, the concrete to grass is accessible, but in the winter, somebody in a wheelchair is gonna have a hard time getting through, you know, plowed snow on top of grass. So are we expecting to put in a sidewalk out to one target or ag lime, or, you know, we're just trying to figure out what you guys want to see for the ADA accessible portion. I did reach out to that Capable Partners group that Luke had brought up at the last council meeting, and I hadn't heard back from them on any of their input on maybe different ranges they've been to, or, you know, just whether maybe something from their perspective of dealing with people that are handicapped on a regular basis at an archery range, so.
Quick question. So no archery allowed anywhere within city limits except at the archery range?
Correct.
There were a lot of properties that were annexed that are 5 acres, 4 acres. And they're kind of country style land. Can there be an exception for acreage? And wherever they set their target, 500 feet behind that, there can be no dwellings or something like that? Because it wouldn't even make sense for me not to be able to shoot a bow and arrow at my property. I mean, if I set up a target, there's nobody for another quarter mile at least through the swamp. I mean, it's just trying to be realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
if we
right
didn't
now,
have the
that is,
situation where we have larger properties, I wouldn't even address it, but there's quite a few of them.
yeah, I mean, that is how it is right now, is technically you really can't shoot, but that's a good point, is that you have a huge lot, and, yeah, why wouldn't you be able to, right?
That would really be something that the police department would need to weigh in on. Parks wouldn't, it's a different department, and
So maybe we could add that for another item at a future COW meeting?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, we just redid the archery hunting ordinance, I think, last year, so I don't know if you wanna redo that all again, or not, if that's what you're talking about, if you wanna bring that up again.
Yeah, because I mean, to put the archery range in, we had to change it, and then we proposed the last ordinance, and we're changing it again now. So like, if we change it, we just want to figure out what we're going to do and change it once and kind of be done with it. So if we need to do more research, I think we just want to bring it back completely at a different time instead of changing it now and then changing it again 2 months down the road or whatever it might be.
soon does this have to be done?
As soon as possible. So I mean, your major concern is that you wanna have a lot, 3 acres, or, I mean, I don't know, I mean, what, Travis, I mean, what do you think? I mean, if you had a lot size that you thought would have room? I mean,
Well, if there's a differentiation between the bow hunting ordinance, where you're actually shooting animals, and the target ordinance, those are two separate pieces.
Target ordinance.
So
I don't
it'll-
think anybody, I guess, I mean, I could shoot a deer in my backyard anytime, but I won. I'd
Yeah,
rather.
so we do allow it in, I think it was 40 contiguous acres, something like that, I think is what required.
How many?
40,
Okay,
because there's only, I think, 1 or 2 properties that have that. And
okay,
we do have 4, and last year you gave out 4 permits for it.
all right. I wasn't thinking about hunting in any way.
Yeah, we can look at it. I mean,
I was just looking
We
at
already
if
have
somebody wanted
language
to set up
for a lot
target their own
size
property.
in that
For-
ordinance then, but it's
yeah.
40 right now.
Yeah.
So we just would have to change that if you wanted to,
Well, that's for hunting.
well, that's for hunting, not
Yes.
for target shooting.
Yeah.
Okay. So we wouldn't have to change that really. If we
I would
Yeah.
recommend not changing that one and just look at the actual discharge ordinance that says you can't.
Go ahead.
I'll look at the current ordinance when I'll have it sent to me. and we'll take a look at it.
Sure. Yeah, because I don't think it's, what we're asking about, I don't think we have in front of us here, do we? Just trying to go through it here and make sure it's not.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, so, yeah, we want to bring it back one more time,
Okay.
I guess, yeah.
And then you can get information from capable partners in that time too,
Okay.
so.
But everything you've got here looks great.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Um,
As far as maintenance goes, I mean, I guess I would say we're just looking at basically clearing the shooting area. I mean, I don't think, unless we had a concrete slab to one target, I mean, I don't know if we need to make sure we're doing that. I would just say just the shooting,
just the
pad
firing
and-
line,
yeah.
the
rest of
sidewalk
it,
that's
I
there
wouldn't
right
worry
now.
about. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think trying to keep it ADA in the winter would be impossible.
There's not many people are gonna shoot it in the
Right,
wintertime.
right.
It's hard on their bows.
Yep.
I'm okay with going along with that, and if we can look at in the future, if we think it needs to be changed, to add archery on private property with people's acreage, because that can be added in, can it, at any time?
I mean, the reality is that you're gonna do it anyway, whether it's allowed or
Mhm.
not, so
Right,
and nobody's gonna,
Exactly,
so, do we wanna just move forward with this, or do we wanna,
yeah, let's just move forward with it.
okay,
It has to be brought in front of council to be voted on. so.
yeah, right.
Okay.
Okay.
And one other thing concerning the archery ranges, the original cow meeting where Jimmy had brought up to kind of change some of the stuff to allow the broadheads, we're wondering about netting and stuff along that north boundary to kind of between the dog park and the archery range, and then right in front of the tin shed. Some of the maintenance guys are going in and out during the day, and if there's people shooting, they kind of gotta watch out that they're not gonna get hit. So I did gather some more numbers on what that would look like if we wanted to protect that north boundary, and then just a little jog in front of the tin shed, so the maintenance guys would maybe feel a little bit safer coming in and out of there during the day. So a lot of the netting, like we talked about the last time, it's not rated for compound bows with high-powered stuff. Most of it's for recurve. A lot of it was for like youth stuff in schools. So some of the other places, they recommended to double up the netting if you're gonna try to use it for compound bows or, higher velocities. So from the firing line to the tin shed is like 150 feet on that fence line, and like if we went 20 feet over, heading the other way. It recommends too, like, you don't wanna have the netting tight, you gotta have at least 20% extra for whatever distance you're trying to cover, so you kind of keep it loose. That way it takes away more of the energy from the arrow. So the nets, cables, and clips for that would be like $6,500. Getting the 10-foot tall you know, you'd have, the netting itself is 10 feet tall, so you'd have to have, you know, posts that are probably 13, 14 feet, so you have some in the ground. And then the brackets to hang the cable across where you would clip the net onto. So looking at like 10 grand to do something like that. So I know last time you, Jimmy, were just kind of looking at how much that would be or whatever, so that was kind of what I got on that. So I don't know if you wanted to look at that further or just go with what we got now.
Is there anything that says we can't just put up a fence, like a 10-foot wood fence, and have no issues with having to replace the net in 5 years or,
Or replace the wood in two.
right? Or some sort of, I mean, I guess I don't know if that was discussed at all.
We would allow
Safer with wood.
Yeah, so would I.
a
We're
fence
doing it for safety.
that high with a conditional use permit. So that's,
Or even just, I mean, just build a fence out of some corrugated steel, like pole barn steel. I mean, it's
We-
gonna go through.
we cannot have that is not allowed in our ordinance. So a wood fence would work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, $10,000 doesn't seem like a huge amount of money to spend. I mean, I don't know that we need to be looking at it urgently or, you know, even this year or next year. I mean, I think we could maybe take a look at that in the future and budget for it and kind of see where it fits, so, but,
I'd be curious to see what a fence would cost, a taller fence.
yeah,
I mean, if we gotta replace a couple boards a year, that's gonna be a hell of a lot cheaper than replacing a net every few years, or a net that might not even stop anything.
That's what
I mean, a wood fence is gonna stop everything, until the board is damaged, of course. And then, I mean, the odd chance that something goes through that damaged board and then hits somebody, that's 1 in a million, but I'd rather see a wood one, even if we have to get a conditional use permit for ourselves to have a taller fence. That's the permanent solution. I feel like the net is like a temporary, just a bigger cost.
yeah, I mean, you mind looking into seeing what the
Yeah.
cost for a wood fence would be? I mean, it's not like it's,
Pressing.
we've had a few arrows kind of go through that one, but I mean, if you're waiting and you're paying attention and you're telling people what's going on, I mean, it's not been a major issue, but I did have some residents concerned that when they're out with their dogs, they've, which, yeah, I mean, if somebody was accidentally drawn back and, pulled the release or something like that, but,
Yes, one thing I thought about was, if with the netting or a fence, then people that are at the dog park, they also can't see if there's anybody over there, At least now they can see if people are shooting, so they can be a little more cautious, but if it's completely blocked, they don't know where somebody's at on the range, if they're at the close target, the 10-yard one, or if they're all the way down at the end, their vision's kind of blocked there, so.
How much is some sample fencing? I mean, can we get somebody to test it, actually, to see if it's even gonna work? Can we get like 50 feet of it and double and triple it up and see if it actually,
The netting, or you just talking
yeah,
about?
the
Okay.
netting.
Yeah, you can, they come in different size panels, so you can buy like a 10 by 10 square or 10 by 30 foot square or rectangle. So they come in different sizes. You could order one for, like the 10 by 10 was like, I think, $250. The bigger panels, the 10 by 30 were $450 a piece, so you could do a test on
a
something
few of
different.
those and then just making sure it's even gonna work before we spend a big money on them.
I'd rather not even mess with the net. Someone could come through and cut it all, and you'd be out 10 grand for another net. I hate the net idea, personally. I mean, you could do that, and you could see, but I think at the end of the day, the net's gonna have a lot more capital issues.
yeah, I mean, let's get the
Yeah.
price on the wood fence too, and then we can kind of, and like I said, I don't think it's urgent kind of stuff, and we can, get a price on it and then see where it fits, in the coming years, so. Let's see, so, we got time, you think, for mosquito spraying discussion?
We could
E4?
probably get into a little bit of it.
Okay, let's get started, so. This is something that I wanted to kind of bring forward, and the cost of spraying is, I think, Mike, you said 7,500, but what we don't see is the callback hours, so, because we have to pay, I think according to the union contract, it's a minimum of 3, right? Yep. For callback hours, then that's comp time, basically, that they can use for vacation time, basically, in the future, or can they take time and a half on it, or?
They have their choice of taking overtime or compensation
Right.
time.
Yep, okay. And that cost is not part of that 7,500, right, Mike? Because that's,
That's correct.
Right.
7,500 is just the actual chemicals.
Right. Then I know Matt, I mean, it's kind of a pain for the guys to have to do it, and then last year, I didn't think it worked all that great, and then you have people that are residents that are, you know, half of them are terrified of the thing, like they think they're gonna get poisoned or something like that, you know, and they run inside and close all their windows, and so, you know, it's just, I'm just debating whether the cost and the time spent for the guys and that kind of thing is it worth doing, you know, do we wanna continue to do it? What's your opinion on that?
The guys don't mind coming in to do it. They come in at dusk. Takes them 3 to 3.5 hours every time they come in. A lot of it depends on wind. Wind direction, we don't go up and down the same roads or the same roads every time. It all depends on what direction the wind is coming from. We'll try to, you know, if the wind is coming out of the north, we'll go down the east-west road to try to carry that, you know, through town that way instead of blowing it back out of town. So there's some variables in it, and I guess it's up to you. Like I said, the guys don't mind coming in to do it. They have been stopped a few times at residents and questioned and stuff like that about it, you know, not very often, but it has happened. We try to do it, you know, at least once a month, sometimes every couple of weeks. A lot of it depends on, you know, are we in a dry spell, are we in a wet spell, that type of thing. We try to do it before community-wide events, street dance or something like that. We'll try to do it that week of that street dance, or Jubilee Days, we'll try and do it before Jubilee Days and try and take care of some mosquitoes during that time. I guess I don't live in town to know what the effects are of it, you know, of them coming by and stuff like that, or you know, working or not working. I don't hear a lot of people say that they don't like it, so.
I personally think it's one of the best services we provide, because I know 4 or 5 years ago, before we started doing this, I have a wooded lot. I couldn't even go outside past 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and now it's like there's nothing. And the problem is, if we don't, we're the only city within this whole district area that doesn't, so all the mosquitoes come here. And when I was campaigning, a lot of people said they liked it, so I'll personally never vote to get rid of that. I think, I was so happy we had that amenity, because that's huge. I mean, that's the difference between me or any of my neighbors being able to go outside or not.
And I voted for it
Yeah.
when we decided to do it, but I'm just curious, you know, the actual cost involved. So when we call those guys back, I mean, we're paying them at basically either time and a half or time that they can take off, you know, even hours other times. So, you know, I mean, how many hours would you say that runs every season that we do that for? I mean,
What, yeah, yearly cost plus comp hours, what is that number altogether?
And my 2 cents on that is it depends on the employee. Some guys take it all as overtime and don't never take it as comp time, and some guys take it as comp time and use it as time off.
right, but I'm asking more like how many hours of time do they spend per season doing that, do you think?
Per season?
Yeah.
Well, I would say it's 4, 5, 6, 7. They probably spray us maybe at a max of maybe 7 to 10 times a season, something like that, I would say.
30 hours.
20 to 30 hours, yeah.
I know everybody I've talked to said they love it. They think it's a great
I do
idea.
too.
And I think it's,
I think it's a great service.
and it all depends on the year, how wet it is, if it rains, if it's wind. There's so many variables when they can go out and spray it. So they may not be able to spray for a month because of the weather. So it's not, I don't know. I think it's been a good idea. I think we should stick with it.
Well, so let's call it 30, but so how many people times that 30 then do we have that?
That would be, you know, everybody included. That's how many times we go out. So it's not one guy doing it every time.
Right.
That's the whole group included. So you said 7 to 10 times. That's 7 to 10 times. That's the season.
Right, but I mean, how many guys when you actually go out and spray, is it just one guy goes around the
Oh,
entire
sure.
town by himself? Or is
One
it?
guy does it by himself. Yep.
Okay.
He'll come in at dusk and he goes home at, you know, it depends on when dusk is. It doesn't pay to spray for mosquitoes before dusk because the mosquitoes aren't out. They come out after dusk, you know, so. And after midnight, the mosquitoes are already dying down. There are not a lot of mosquitoes out after midnight anyway. So I tell the guys when you get towards that midnight mark, just roll back in. Don't think if you're missing part of the street, just come back in. You pretty much covered everything you can cover.
So, yeah, so it's only one guy going out each time and.
One guy out.
Yeah.
So what's,
30 hours. So I
what's
mean,
the average pay of a public works guy?
So I'm just kind of doing rough math in my head here for total productive cost per hour. It vary staff to staff, right? Some will elect no insurance, others will have family coverage, those kinds of things. I think it's a safe bet to say that based on 30 hours. There's probably no scenario where we're spending less than $1,500 but probably no scenario where we're spending more than 3,000. And that would compensate, that would
Worst
include
case
the
scenario, we're
time
only
and a half.
spending probably 10 grand on it, right? So.
In total for the year, with the
everything.
chemicals and the
Yeah.
time and stuff, yeah, that, I don't think we would do worse
Yeah.
than that.
It's hard to take that one away.
Well, I just wanted to bring it up and kind of see where we were at with that. I know Josie and I had talked that maybe we thought they were mixing chemicals, so you had to have
I
maybe
did
two
think that
guys
there
or.
were two guys spraying. Yep.
Yeah, right, so yeah, no, I just wanted to pick your guys' brain on it and see, and, see if it was worth doing, and I know, I didn't know if it was a problem for the guys, or if it was a pain in the butt to have to do it, and so, and I had some residents say they kind of more the opposite thing to me, so.
There are some areas that'll
There-
always
there's
have
both.
more effect than other areas. If you live on like Rum River Drive and you got all the backwater behind you for the Rum
Yeah.
River, it's not gonna be as effective for you as it is somebody over here, downtown. There's not any wetland, there's mosquitoes, moving water in the creek, so it's gonna have a lot more effect on people that don't have any low-lying areas around them.
Okay, well, yeah, that was all I was curious about, and so we can definitely,
I had another question on
Doing
that,
that.
Matt. So last year, was that the pure mix last year, or did you try the more organic one at all last
No,
year?
we organic one we used 2 years ago, we use straight up
Okay.
permethrin now. That's
Okay.
what all the communities around us,
Yep.
that's, we're using the same stuff.
Okay.
Yep.
I was wondering if maybe last year there was less effect because it was the natural, but that was my, okay.
the rest of the stuff on the agenda for tonight, I don't think is pressing. I mean, we could move that maybe to the next committee of the whole, if that's all right with you guys, so. Do we need to just adjourn the meeting, or do we need to, recess it, or I don't know what? I haven't had to do this yet, so help me out.
Mayor and council, I will just move those to the next committee of the whole meeting, and it would just be a motion to adjourn.
Okay,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilman Lundin and a second from Councilman Merrill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion, and all opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. We are adjourned.